Please help me give big smooches to Dan Savage.
Hey.
Oh my goodness. I cannot believe you are here on Dates and Mates. I always say, Dan, I've been doing the show for 10 years, which I feel like a podcasting, I feel, I don't want to say dinosaur because I don't want to associate.
Oh my God, if you're a dinosaur, what am I? I'm like a molten planet with no life forms on it yet.
You are the Big Bang, really. You are just you were the inception of so many things. And personally, I just have to thank you for your Savage Love column because my husband has been a reader for ages. And, he learned a few things from you, Dan.
Well, you're welcome. You owe me 10% of your orgasms then going forward.
I'm not sure how to pay that. Is there a Venmo or something like an orgasm Venmo? We'll figure it out. But yeah, I mean, I can't believe you've been doing Savage Love since 1991.
Yeah, I started writing Savage Love, my sex advice column, in 1991. So my sex advice column predates the internet and the Clinton administration. It's elderly. I've actually gotten letters from people who told me unnecessarily that their parents were reading my sex advice column before they were born, and they are an adult writing to me for sex advice now. And I say that's unnecessary because I don't want to think about how old I am or how long I've been doing this, and I don't like it when my readers remind me.
No, but you are experienced, and that's really what matters. It's the experience, and I've seen a lot of shifts, and I've only been doing this 15 years I've been coaching, 10 years I've been doing the show, but I imagine a lot has shifted for you. What do you feel like is the biggest change in dating and relationships since you began this work?
When I first started writing Savage Love, half the questions would begin or end with, "Am I normal?" And I don't get that question anymore, and I'm really glad of it. I think people have finally gotten used to the idea, or it's gotten into everyone's heads, that no one is normal, that we're all individuals and very, very different. There was this tremendous pressure that people were placed under and then placed on themselves at a certain point to conform and be normative when it came to desire and relationships, and who they were supposed to be. And so people who would write and ask me if they were normal usually weren't. Usually were doing something or wanted something or having a relationship in a different way than they thought they were supposed to. And they wanted to be reassured that they were normal. And I think what they often meant by "am I normal" was, is this okay? And that's a very different question. Um, and it has a very different kind of other focused answer. If you're not hurting anyone, if it's consensual, if you're being honest, if you're not being manipulative, if you're not lying by omission or commission, then it's okay. And as for normal, a few years ago they did a study in the UK where they tried to measure paraphilias or kinks, and there's literally the definition of paraphilia is non-normative desire. And what they found was the majority of people had a paraphilia, which means non-normative desire is normative, which means non-normative desire ain't non-normative. It is actually normative. So the odder you are, the more unique you are about your relationships or what you want in intimacy. Paradoxically, we discovered years and years and years after I finally managed to reassure everyone that
Didn't even hear it.
years and years after I finally successfully managed to reassure everyone and others that they were indeed normal, we find out that everyone's technically not.
It's funny because as you said that, I was like, oh, I do get a lot of questions that end with "Am I normal?" Maybe I'm just like a baby advice giver.
Yeah, maybe
But
people know not to take that question to me anymore. They've learned not to ask.
right, true. But I mean, you always tell people like it is, and you give people very direct and actionable advice, which I love. I'm curious what you are seeing now. If you're not seeing the "Am I normal?" where have things shifted?
It's all situational ethics. I wished I'd coined the AITA acronym. I've coined a lot of acronyms and gotten a lot of phrases and new words into the, into the culture, into the English language. But I get a lot of, I did this, they did that. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's the A word in this
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah.
When I started writing it, it was much more of a sex advice column, and there wasn't such a thing as Google, and every sex act or fetish or interest or even relationship model didn't have its own wiki page, and now they do. So people don't need to ask me what a particular kind of toy is or how to perform a particular kind of sex act that they may have heard of, uh, because they have wiki and they have Google and there's a million online manuals. So all the
Sure.
questions now are really weighing in on relationship conflicts where often no one is the, AITA stands for am I the, and often it's the case that no one's the, you know, the A word.
You can say the A
Everyone's
word. It's
just
fine.
wanting what they want, and their wants are in conflict. And how do you resolve that? How do you
Yeah.
negotiate that? And relationships are ongoing negotiations, um, where you make compromises, you come to resolutions, they work for a while, and then maybe the wheels come off and you need to tune up, or you need to make new compromises, sometimes accommodations. And a relationship really is, I've always I think a relationship is a story that two people tell together about who they are, not as individuals, but who they are as a pair.
Hmm.
And that story can get complicated, and may need revisions, or new chapters. And whether you can continue to write your story together is the question that, or want to, is the question people wrestle with.
Yeah, for sure. And for a lot of my listeners, the same is in dating. They're wrestling with the question of how, like, how do I do this? How do I do dating? And that's another thing it's not really Googleable. But I always say on the show that dating is a set of learned skills. We have this belief like we're supposed to just know. We should know how to interact. We should know how to build a relationship, right? We should know how to text. Like both when I started this podcast and certainly when you started the Savage Lovecast, texting was not the primary mode of communication in dating and relationships, and now it is. And so we wanted the efficiency. We liked developing technology to support us in being faster, being, more um being able to communicate anytime, day or night. But at the same time, it created a whole other set of issues.
Yeah, text is torture because you can't see someone's facial expression. It's hard to tell when someone's being sardonic, uh, or ironic. Um, and we all have been there where we sat there staring at an ambiguous text, wondering, taking it the wrong way, or gaming out all the ways it could possibly be taken. And we wouldn't have that problem if that was an in-person interaction, or even on the telephone, listening to the sound of someone's voice. Things can seem harsh in a text that, if somebody is saying it in a gentle way, it wouldn't seem so harsh. But I actually completely agree with you that dating is a skill set that unfortunately each of us has to learn through trial and error. And it helps to have a coach. It helps to have somebody in your corner. It helps to have friends. You can, you know, ask for their input if they've observed you with, dating.
And if they're not an
Um,
idiot.
and if they're not an
But
idiot, yeah, beware. But sometimes you just have to learn, um,
yeah.
as you go. And unfortunately, in that process, like you're going to get hurt. You're probably going to hurt other people without malicious intent. Um, and you're going to want to be forgiven, and you have to. There's no being forgiven without giving forgiveness.
Mm.
Everyone wants to be forgiven, and we all have such a hard time forgiving. And if we live
Oof.
in an economy where it's all demand and no supply when it comes to forgiveness, we're all going to be miserable.
Oh my gosh. That actually makes me think of an interview that I heard you do with our friend of the show, Anna Sale, on Death, Sex, and Money, where you were talking about cheating and what you talked about that moment of forgiveness. And I'm going to kind of paraphrase because I'm not listening to the interview right now, but you said something like, you always say when you are with someone, you would take a bullet for them. Like, you would take a bullet for your partner. And you said to Anna, non-monogamy is that bullet. Like, someone cheating on you is that bullet. And
No one, let's not conflate non-monogamy and cheating.
you're right.
Monogamy, everyone kind of knows what monogamy is. It's these two people only have sex with each other. Non-monogamy is a spectrum. A non-monogamous relationship can be unethical. It could be somebody cheating. There are a lot of ethical non-monogamous relationships out there where there's some accommodation around outside sex, or maybe it's polyamorous and there's actually dating other people. Non-monogamy isn't cheating, and cheating isn't non-monogamy. It's also possible to cheat in the context of a non-monogamous relationship. All non-monogamous relationships, like monogamous relationships, have rules, and it's possible for somebody to violate the rules of their non-monogamous relationship and betray their partner that they're in was supposed to be an ethically non-monogamous relationship with. My point around monogamy is that, and this is not to tell everyone to be non-monogamous, it's for everyone to have, who wants a monogamous relationship, to have realistic expectations. Cheating happens. And how are you going to feel about it when it does happen? And if we tell ourselves that cheating is unforgivable and it's not something a relationship can survive, then we will experience it as unforgivable and not something our relationship can survive when it happens to us. And anybody who says it can't happen to them or they would never do it is whistling past the world's most densely populated graveyard. And I think we need a more forgiving attitude towards monogamy. Is literally the only thing we expect people to do perfectly throughout their entire lives if they want to be regarded as literally any good at it at all. You can be, a gold medal winning snowboarder and fall down and get up, and they don't take your gold medals away. If you are in a monogamous relationship with someone for 50 years and they cheated on you once, did they never love you? Or were they good at monogamy and fell? I think that person might have been good at monogamy. And I don't say that to talk people out of wanting monogamy or making monogamous commitments. I say that so that people who have a monogamous commitment don't walk away from it because somebody else was human and fallible in regards to this. People are human and fallible in regards to everything. But this is the one thing that we expect and demand perfection from our partners, and we're not going to get it. So that's an unreasonable expectation.
Yeah. Well, we have so many unreasonable expectations. But you know what Anne Lamott says, expectations are just resentments waiting to happen. So I'm not big on expectations, but I'm in a committed monogamous relationship, and that works for me. But on the show, I'm always talking about how people have to design their own dating destiny or, relationship future. And I don't just blindly accept because monogamy was the norm for so long, or the norm for my parents, or whatever stories that we've taken in. I don't assume that is true for my listeners. And actually, I work with OkCupid as their official dating coach, and we've seen there's been a major increase in people identifying as non-monogamous in their dating profiles.
And isn't that great? Because then monogamous people, if more people who know what they want is a non-monogamous relationship identify themselves as wanting a non-monogamous relationship, then the people who want a monogamous relationship are going to find themselves in what's supposed to be a monogamous relationship with someone who doesn't actually want that. We want to live in a world where we self-sort a little bit more aggressively when it comes to monogamy and non-monogamy. And everybody, used to be that everybody wanted monogamy because that's what good people wanted and that's what everybody should want. So everybody pretended that that's what they did want, or convinced themselves that that's what they did want, and then discovered in a committed monogamous relationship that wasn't what they did want after all. And then how do you retroactively negotiate the terms of that relationship, which is hard? People tend to avoid that conversation and find it easier to cheat. And then the person who wanted monogamy and could do it winds up devastated.
How do you begin that conversation if you, let's say you're not years down the road in a relationship. Let's say you're dating and you're early in the relationship, and maybe you've never had a non-monogamous relationship before, but it's something that you're curious about. How do you begin that?
Well, there's certainly, you could listen to this show and then say to your partner, I was listening to this podcast and, you know, they were talking about non-monogamy.
We're a conversation starter, Dan.
Dot, dot, dot. How do you feel? Now, it could be that the person you initiate that conversation is going to be, will say something like, I think that's wrong because that's what I'm supposed to think. And isn't that what you think? And that's probably what you're trying to find out from me is I think that's wrong, right? That's the right answer here. And so you
Right?
do have to have a slightly deeper conversation about it. Um, I think one of the things that straight people have learned from gay people over the last 30, 40 years as more straight people have gotten to know the gay people that they know is that for gay couples, monogamy is a choice that they make consciously and together. It's not a default setting. It's a discussion.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a discussion that can be revisited over time. Monogamy might be working for you right now. In 10 years, maybe it's not working for you. In 20 years, maybe you have kids and this extended web of family and this shared history together, but you're not really having sex together anymore, but you still value and treasure and love your relationship and your marriage and your kids and your good parents and partners. And rather than be in conflict about sexual deprivation, you just want to say, you know what, whatever happens, happens, whatever you need to do. And, be discreet and courteous and don't be cruel. Don't sleep with my sister. Don't sleep with a coworker. Don't sleep with a neighbor. But obviously this doesn't define our connection anymore.
Hmm.
And I say that, when I say that, people are sometimes like, you're obsessed with sex. How is that me saying that a relationship can transcend the sex or desire that it initially brought two people together, me being obsessed with sex? I think, companionate relationships, which almost all relationships become if they last long enough, get a short shrift. A lot of people in the advice industrial complex are like, keep it hot. Here's how to keep the spark alive. And it makes people where they don't have sex anymore, but they still love each other, want to be together, feel like they're not really in love or they're doing it wrong. And
Hmm.
it's crazy because every once in a while there's a story in the paper, oh, look at this couple, they've been married for 75 years. They're 95 and still together. They met when they were 20 and got married when they were 20. Nobody looks at that picture of the two 95-year-olds and think they're doing it a lot.
I have to tell you, she's probably. I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but my husband's parents have been married for 60. God, I think 50. We have 55. It was probably 58 years, and this last time she was visiting, she was telling me all these stories about their sex life and they still get it in. They still get it in. So you cannot assume. I was like, that's more information
That's
that I needed to know.
great. And more
And
power to them.
she told me about some tips of things that revitalized. I guess she wanted to pass, each one teach one. She wanted to pass on the knowledge for her son.
Oh my
I
God, I
don't
love
know.
that expression, each one teach one. Revitalize is a key word there, though. That means there was times when the tide went out.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't have to be revitalized if it hadn't been devitalized at some point or if it
Yeah.
hadn't, been on a low ebb. There are times when in a, multi-decade long-term relationship, maybe that connection wanes, is less important. Maybe the fire goes out. But if you don't, if you're not full of resentment and anger about that, maybe then it can be reignited at some point. But resentment and anger will prevent that from happening.
For sure. And clear communication is the only way to have that. And that's what I see. This is what I find that most questions that I get here are ending in what should I do or what does this mean?
Or what do I say? How do I
What do I
ask?
say? Yeah. When usually the other person's behavior is very clear. If you take off those expectations that we were just talking about, usually someone has already told you what they're trying to tell you, either in their actions or in their words, and you don't want to hear it. And so you ask me, well, what should I do? Because maybe you just want the confirmation that they're an asshole. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But that is something that I always just come back to communication. And if more of us just said what we wanted or what we felt, that would clear up a lot of the confusion.
And if we took the answer that we got for the answer we're going to get.
Yeah.
People come to me, and I'm sure they come to you all the time saying, I asked for, or I said, and I got this back, and it's not what I wanted to hear. Now, what do I say to get the person to say something different, feel something different, want something different? And there are no magic words, no incantations. A relationship is a compromise in addition to a myth or a story that two people create together.
Hmm.
It's a compromise, and you're going to have to give some things up.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the end, I feel like it's worth it. You and I are both in relationships. I I feel like it in the relationship I'm in with the communication that we have with my mother-in-law's tips, it just keeps getting better.
Oh my God, my mother-in-law does not give me sex tips, and I'm so glad of
Well,
that.
I mean, she better not. I mean, you are the goat of sex tips and relationship advice, so she knows her lane.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're both here. Relationships, I never want to say like Terry and I are never going to break up because it just feels jinxy to say that. I'm too Irish Catholic
Right.
to say that.
Right.
We've been together almost 30 years, and 24 of those years have been open. And the last like 10 years have been kind of poly. Like Terry has a boyfriend, I have a boyfriend. Um,
Oh, wow.
it shocks me when, sometimes I share that and people will look at me right in the eye and say, I could never do what you and Terry do because I value commitment too highly. And I'm like, how many
I've been
decades
committed for 30 years.
do I have
Yeah.
to be married to this man
Yeah.
before I get some credit for that commitment that exists? And often the next thing out of somebody's mouth who literally, this has happened more than once, I could never do what you guys do because I value commitment too highly. All 4 of my marriages were monogamous. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you're committed to monogamy. You're not committed to any of the morons who married you. Like I'm committed to Terry, and it was monogamy that we were monogamous for many years. And it was monogamy that like we had conversations about, and then what non-monogamy would look like and openness. And there have been different stages. And, I said a minute ago, a relationship is a compromise, and it's a compromise that you're constantly kind of renegotiating. So that you can stay happy together. And no one's happy when they're told, that job you took, that thing you agreed to, that way you felt in 1998, you have to feel that way now. You have to have that job now.
Mm.
No one wants to live forever 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so who we are now, how we function now, how we love each other now is very different than how we loved each other 30 years ago. And it would be anyway, even if we pretended we felt the same way, we would experience each other differently because it's been decades together. And there's deeper meanings and there's different meanings that come in time. And something can be more or less important. That something can be terribly important at first and become less important in time. That doesn't make you less important to each other. And
Mm.
sexual exclusivity, I really think, was very important to us at the start. It really laid a foundation and became less important over time. And then it became a stressor. It became, being sexually exclusive became something that wasn't bringing us together. It was pulling us apart. It
Ooh.
was strain on our relationship, which is why we renegotiated it and are doing not what would be right for everybody, but what's right for us. And I fully respect people who are monogamous who are doing what's right for them. And, I also know, and it's not like we went from monogamous to non-monogamous. That's the that's the track everyone's going to be on. I know people who were open in their relationships early or for a time and are now closed, and monogamy is right for them again or now. And it's whatever works for those 2 people, or, in the case of me and my husband, those 4 people.
You get to choose your own adventure in
Yeah.
dating and relationships. Well, you have, I'm sure, a lot more wisdom and a lot of magic words to share with our audience. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, will you stick around and
Yeah,
answer some of
absolutely.
these Dear Damona questions? All right.
My pleasure.
Dear Damona. Damona, help me.
So we'll just kick it off, Dan, with our first question from a listener who sent me a DM on Instagram.
I love your podcast. I've really been enjoying it, and especially because I am finally dating again after not really dating for the last, decade or so of my life. So I recently had an experience with a guy that I went on 2 dates with who I really enjoyed a lot. And he was clear from the start that he's He's like really looking for like a serious commitment. Like he's looking for a husband, essentially. And, you know, I want that too. But what kept on coming up for me was like how you go into dating where both of you are looking for like a similar long-term committed relationship. Like you both have your eyes on that similar prize, but not be holding up the measuring stick of, could I be with you forever? Like at every moment. Do you know what I mean? Like it just feels like so much pressure, and that to me doesn't seem like the ideal breeding ground, if you will, for discovering whether or not someone might fit that bill. Does that make sense? Thank you again for what you do. I really value it, and I'm certain that I'm not alone.
Dan, it's funny because I start all of my dating coaching clients off with mindset and figuring out both who you are, what you bring into the relationship, and what your relationship goal is. But I think there's a line between having clarity in your relationship goal and having that be like a ticking clock in your relationship.
You have to be able to compartmentalize. You have to be able to, you've come to agreement about ultimate goals. You're both open to a serious commitment to marriage. And now you have to set that aside, knowing you're both on the same page, and just enjoy each other and live in the moment. And sometimes that's easier said than done, particularly if people are anxious about wanting to find a partner, and are obsessing about it a little too much. But you just have to be able to, walk and chew gum, do both at the same time. You have to be able to like live in the moment, enjoy this person. Dating is vetting. Like you're going to figure out whether this person is someone who could be your husband, and he's going to figure out if you're someone who could be his. And that takes time and spending time together. And it's almost like the both of you being open to marriage with a potential future partner. All right, that's a baseline. Now what? Now everything else about whether you can, you enjoy the taste of his spit, or you enjoy spending time together, and you can tolerate his bad habits and he can tolerate your bad habits. And that just means making time and space for this person in this relationship. And whether they're husband material and you are too, coincidentally, whether Yahtzee that happens, that will reveal itself. And you don't want to rush that.
Yeah, the timing thing, that is a factor. And I feel a lot of anxiety from my clients over this ticking clock of, our non-renewable resource. Yeah.
Everyone has a ticking clock. If you're 50 and somebody says, I need 40 years to figure this out, that's too long. Right? And if you're, whatever age you are, and someone tells you they can figure this out in a weekend,
that's too fast.
That's too fast. Like, where's just right? And for different people, it falls in different places. I wouldn't let the man I am now married to, I wouldn't let him call himself my boyfriend at first. And for a while, we didn't say I love you to each other. We started saying there's something I want to say, but I'm not going to. And what we both demonstrated to each other at those moments was a certain kind of patience and emotional restraint, and that we valued each other enough not to rush things.
Yeah.
And to telegraph to each other that that's what we were doing. Like, you're a real candidate, which means, let's go through God, I'm torturing my metaphors. I've been sick for a week and I'm not getting any sleep. If you're a real candidate, there's a primary process, and dating is that primary process. And you're going to get vetted, and they're going to vet you.
Right.
And if you rush through that, it's not, sometimes it works out. I know people who got married in 2 weeks and were together for the rest of their lives. That is a thing that can happen. That is statistically less likely. That those relationships are far likelier to end poorly, but it can happen.
Yeah. And if you are able to express what you want at all phases of the relationship, because I think a lot of times people don't even have that clarity. So it sounds like for this listener, the other person is hitting that note a little bit too hard for them. But like, I remember even in phases of my relationship, like when my husband, before we were married, spoiler alert, how the story ends, but he was living with another with a roommate. The roommate was moving out. And so he was like, maybe I should give up my apartment and move in with you. And I was like, hold on a second. I'm not moving in with anyone unless, for me, the rule was this is a step towards marriage. And I don't need a ring on my finger. I don't need a firm commitment, but I need to know we're walking the same path. So I said, you're not moving in now. You're going to take some time to think about it. And if you feel that you are on that same path, we can talk about this again.
And then you had to make your best guess about whether he was lying to you or not. He said, oh yeah, I am taking a step down this path with you.
True, but he took like 3 months. He took enough time. He didn't end up leaving that apartment. And then he took the time, and when he came back to me, I felt like this was enough time for you to make a decision that was really authentic. And it ended up working out. And we lived in a studio. Moved into my studio. I had a walk-in closet. I had so much space for myself and for two people. It was so small. And I thought, if we can make it through this, we can make it through anything.
You know, if two people are right for each other, it rarely is the case that taking it a little more slowly doomed the relationship.
Yeah.
If two people are wrong for each other and they rushed into a commitment, man, that realization after you've rushed into a premature commitment that you made a mistake, and when it's hard to extricate yourself, you want to beware of that. You know, my relationship before I met my husband, we moved in with each other right away, and then it was a bad scene. And I kind of overcorrected with my husband. You know, he was at my apartment every night. I was going to move. We talked it, you know, his lease was ending also, kind of like you and your husband. We talked about whether we should move in with each other. And I was just like, it feels too soon. And he was like, okay, I will get my own apartment. And the joke was he got another apartment that he was never in. But it demonstrated to me a kind of emotional maturity and also concern for my comfort and the pace I wanted to move at, that he was willing to do that and to wait. And then, you know, after that, we bought our first condo together and went in both feet.
And the rest is history. Okay.
Yeah. But the previous relationship, like, I have a great feeling about this guy. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to take a risk. And boy, I regretted that one at leisure.
But see, every experience leads to the next one. So you learned from that, and then you were able to move forward differently with Terry. Okay, I have one more question for you, Dan. This, I will read it to you. This is from a listener named R. She says, I am looking for a life partner, but I also crave sex and find myself getting a bit lost after starting a fling with someone new. Do you have any tips for generating sexual satisfaction, not just self-pleasure, and being more in tune with our sexual selves without relying on a partner? Also, any advice on detaching meaning from hookups that fizzle out or wanting them to be more than they are?
Oh my God, that's so many questions.
It's so many questions, but I feel like they're all related because, like she says, I crave sex and I get lost after starting a fling with someone new. But then she's also saying she wants to detach meaning from hookups that fizzle out. And she's like placing this meaning on the hookup. And this is like a dissonance that I see coming up a lot of people who are like, oh, I want to be like this. I want to be sexually free, but like I keep getting attached. So let's take that part first, and then we can talk about the self-pleasure aspect.
Well, you got to know yourself, right? If hooking up with a lot of different people leaves you feeling drained or not great, well, that's a sign that maybe hooking up with lots of randos isn't for you. Mm-hmm. And if you're the kind of person who obsesses about, I guess, the rejection that's implicit in a hookup that fizzled out over time, or a regular hookup that fizzled out over time, man, you're going to want to maybe hold back. There's no guarantee that holding back means a new hookup or relationship won't fizzle out. A lot of them do. Sometimes they do, and people are married and they stay together anyway. Mm-hmm. And the sexual tension drains away. It seems like this person's having a hard time balancing a desire for sex, novelty, adventure with attaching too much meaning to, you know, these relationships that are transitory or ephemeral by their very nature. And you can have sex and sexual adventure. And it also seemed like part of the question was like, how do I have solo sex that is meaningful, and that how can I
Yeah.
meet my own needs without
Right.
exposing myself to the hurt that comes, or the way I obsess over things that didn't go anywhere. Well, invest in toys, invest in yourself, invest in your own pleasure. Find somebody that you really vibe with. There's a lot of different ways now to get the kind of affirmation that people used to be only be able to get from partnered sex, like affirmation of your own desirability. We talk about all the bad things that social media does for us, um, and the distraction it can be. I've had some meaningful relationships, friendships, not relationships, with people that I met on social media, where it was just sort of like banter, and then we like would get a little deeper and talk about our relationships and talk about who we were, and then there was just something about their presence that was initially sparked by a sexual attraction, and they're remaining, with me even as like it became something else that was affirming and arousing in a way. Like every time I get a message from one of these guys, I'm like, oh, fine,
Still got
that
it.
that's nice. So how can you, like I would say to the caller, if like a lot of hookups with a lot of different guys is how you've been seeking sexual satisfaction and affirmation, how do you disaggregate those? Where else can you get affirmation of your desirability? Well, all over the internet. Where else can you get sexual satisfaction? At your own hands. And it's really important to be skilled at pleasuring yourself, because anybody you're with as a partner is going to rely on your cues and what you communicate to them about your pleasure as the guide to them giving you pleasure. There's something really hot about somebody who takes their pleasure from you and on you. That can be very affirming and satisfying. Most people need guidance on how to please you, and knowing how to please yourself, I think, is really important, especially for women and other female bodied people to hear. Men arrive at partnered sex usually experts on their own orgasms, experts on their own pleasure, because men have been masturbating for 4 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years before they arrive at partnered sex. Far too many women arrive at partnered sex not having ever masturbated, or not having really become experts on pleasing themselves so that they can help somebody else please them.
Yeah.
I hear from women who are like, I had sex for the first time, I'm 19 years old, and it wasn't pleasurable for me. And it's like, well, you were with some 19, 20-year-old boy.
And it lasted 32 seconds.
Yeah, it lasted 32
2
seconds.
pumps and
He never, he didn't touch me in the way I need to be touched. Well, did you tell him? Did you show him? Do you know how, a guy, most males, know where their orgasmic plateaus are, know where the point of orgasmic inevitability comes for them. They arrive at partnered sex expert on their own pleasure. And too many women arrive at partnered sex expecting some guy to be instantly experts on their sexual pleasure. And that's kind of not how it works.
No, I think, we need to make, first of all, we need to make asking for consent sexy, because I think it is, right? Like, can I touch you there? Is this okay?
Oh,
like, does
my
this feel
God.
good? Right? Why have we made it like, oh, well, that's the unsexy thing? And just communicating, right, Dan? Like,
can I tell you this? The first guy who ever kissed me?
Tell me.
Oh my God. Like, problematically, he was the boyfriend of a girlfriend of mine.
Oh.
But setting that aside for a
Highly
moment.
problematic. But
also problematic. I was 16 and I think he was 23.
Also problematic. But at the time, very hot.
Yeah. Totally consensual. And I think the age of consent in Illinois was 16. So nothing.
Look, I got stories too, Dan.
Illegal.
Don't even worry about it. You're safe here.
No power over me. There was no exploitation going on. And we were hanging out, and my friend left, and we were hanging out, and there was just this tension in the room. And I didn't want, I was gay and closeted, and I'm like, am I misreading this? Am I engaging in some sort of wishful thinking? And I just like hung back. And at one point we were like sitting next to each other on the couch, and he looked at me and said, "What would you do if I kissed you?" He didn't say, "Can I kiss you?" He didn't lunge at me and try to kiss me. He asked me a question that had to have an answer. And it wasn't like, "Can I kiss you? Yes or no right now." It invited a conversation. Like, "What would you do if I kissed you?"
Very
And
hot.
it was the sexiest thing, even, decades later, I think a man has ever said to me. And it was somebody asking, people would say to me, like, "It's not sexy to ask somebody to kiss them." It's like, no, 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 no. I know that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Because I still think about that moment
Yeah.
when this impossibly hot 23-year-old Irish guy with black shaggy hair and big blue eyes looked at me and said, "What would you do if I kissed you?" And
And
I
that's
said,
such a
"Shatter into 100,000 million pieces." I don't remember what I said. I remember what he said.
right? Isn't it funny, like those moments where you're like, you just have like the certain pieces that stand out. But what you just said, Dan, that can be applied to so many other situations in dating and relationships too. Just like get curious and say, like, what if? Let's say, what if?
And that's something that I think straight people can learn from gay people. I like to say that gay people are better at sex than straight people, to be
Now
provocative.
hold on a minute. No.
I know. But you know why we're better at sex? It's not because we're magic. It's because when a woman and a man go to bed together for the first time, when they get to consent, not always, but almost always, it's the end of the conversation about sex, because everything that's going to happen next is assumed. Like, it's going to be vaginal intercourse, maybe some foreplay, maybe this, maybe that, but PIV. When two dudes go to bed together for the first time and they get to consent, it is the beginning of a whole conversation about what's going to happen.
Interesting.
And if there's anything straight, we took marriage from you guys. If there's anything straight people could steal from gay people, I call them the 4 magic words. Like, a man and a man are going to go to bed together for the first time. One or the other, sometimes both at the same time, will say, "What are you into?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's such an empowering question. Like, particularly when I was a young gay man, to be asked that question was very empowering, because I could ask for what I wanted. I could say what I didn't want. Sometimes asking for what I wanted ruled out everything I didn't ask for. Sometimes I had to be a bit clearer about that. But it was empowering in a way that, as somebody having sex with men, I think women need to be asked that question and not be under this pressure to that agreeing to be sexual or even to have sex is agreeing to penetration, because penetration is a whole other level. I say to straight guys all the time, if every time you said yes to sex, you got penetrated, you would probably say yes less often than you might. If you could say yes to sex and it meant mutual masturbation, it meant oral sex, it meant whatever,
A cornucopia of
or it could
choices.
also mean penetration. I get questions all the time from straight guys who are jealous because gay guys have so much sex, but a lot of the sex we have, straight guys wouldn't think was sex because it's not penetration.
Oh my gosh, that is, Dan, you're like opening up a whole other conversation, and we're like coming to the end here. But mind blown, and like I learned so much from you. So I'm just so grateful for you spending time with me and with the Dates and Mates audience here. And if people have more specific questions and want to go a little deeper, no pun intended, Savage Lovecast is it's the best. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And to prep for today, I listen mostly to history podcasts because I'm a royalty geek. I listened to a bunch of your podcasts and I really enjoyed your POV and perspective. And I'd be happy to come back again sometime. And I will have you on my show too. We will make this a mutual love fest.
Oh my gosh. I'm like blushing. Thank you. Thank you so much. And this
My
was
pleasure.
really great advice for our Dates and Mates listeners. So I appreciate you being here. And
And
congratulations.
I hope I managed to NPR it enough to pull it off with
that was
not as explicit as I get on Savage Love.
very NPR. very, very PG-13, like on the edge of R.
Let the record show one of us said asshole and it was you.
It
I
was
said
the record.
A.
It's going in the records, but Lindsay has recorded it. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you.